If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Dong, dong, dong. Luke, who had been sleeping soundly, began to hear an eerie sound, like the tolling of a funeral bell. His eyes slowly opened, and he noticed a cell phone vibrating on the nightstand, emitting that gloomy tone. It was Wednesday's phone, and the alarm she had set since they arrived in Shadowside. She had been exploring her new phone and chose this sound as her alarm. What a lovely alarm, Luke thought, dark circles under his eyes, as he lazily got out of bed. It was very early in the morning, and today marked the beginning of his 11th grade at a normie school. Wednesday, who had been sleeping in her usual corpse-like pose, opened her eyes and sat up slowly, as if a corpse were returning to life or a vampire rising from its coffin. Her expression showed neither fatigue nor laziness, unlike Luke. Calmly, she extended her arm toward the phone and turned off the alarm. "How can you be this fine after waking up?" Luke asked in a hoarse, groggy tone. They had gone to bed at 5 in the morning and had slept less than 3 hours. Even though their outcast bodies were superior to those of normies and theoretically required less sleep, Luke loved to sleep and rest. "Sleeping 2 or 3 hours is enough for me. The same should go for you, especially considering your 3 auras," Wednesday replied in her usual monotone voice, showing no signs of fatigue. "Sleeping is one of life's pleasures. 2 or 3 hours is way too little," Luke justified himself, feeling as though an energy emanating from the bed was pulling him back into its comforting embrace. "Maybe you're tired because of last night," Wednesday commented with what seemed like a faint, mocking smile as she got out of bed. Luke didn't respond instantly, as his gaze shifted to Wednesday, who was wearing one of his white t-shirts that, for obvious reasons, was too big for her. The shirt covered halfway up her thighs. The contrast between the immaculate white of the fabric and her pale skin further accentuated her figure, and most tantalizing of all, Luke knew that beneath the folds of the fabric was nothing. Feeling Wednesday's gaze fixed on him, Luke stopped staring at her thighs and looked up at her. "Ahem." "I guess so," he replied to the earlier question. "Score 1 for me then," Wednesday said, opening a drawer and grabbing a small notebook with a pencil. As she opened the notebook, she could see that on the first sheet were written down her name and Luke's name. Below each had what was a little stick, which stood for a point. She went to the bottom and wrote down a point for her. "I'm still in the lead," Luke said with a slight smile, looking from the side. He had 2 more points than Wednesday. The game basically was a competition of who satisfied the other in sex first. That is, the one who came first lost, or he who was more smashed and pleased after they were done. Both were very competitive, to the point that they brought this facet to their relationships at night. The game had a duration of 1 month. The loser must do what the winner says without being able to object to the request. "Be happy for now. I'll win," Wednesday said, closing the notebook. "We'll see. I'll go thinking about what I want you to do the day I win," Luke said with a smirk. "Shut up and go take the potion, sister," Wednesday said, giving Luke a kick in the rear. Taking advantage of the push, he headed to the bathroom. 20 minutes after they got up, they left the room and headed to the kitchen, where Natasha, in her Lucy form, was finishing preparing breakfast. Wednesday wore a long-sleeved, lightweight textured sweater in dark gray, subtly fitted to highlight her figure without losing her understated air. On the bottom, she sported worn black skinny jeans and black Converse sneakers. While her outfit maintained the monochromatic essence she was known for, it was noticeably more contemporary and mundane than her usual classic and gothic attire. As for Luke, he chose to stick to his masculine style, albeit in its feminine version. He wore an oversized black shirt that hung loosely over his figure, covering his hips and striking a balance between comfort and neutrality. To complete the look, he opted for straight-cut, lightweight black pants, avoiding unnecessary tightness. On his feet were simple, dark athletic sneakers. Despite his efforts to remain inconspicuous, his new appearance was so perfect that even the simplest outfit seemed tailor-made to enhance it. What stood out the most was his hair. Long golden locks fell in soft, natural waves, framing his face flawlessly. The golden tone had warm highlights that shimmered even in the dimmest light, giving him an ethereal, almost otherworldly air. Though the hair appeared untamed, with slightly tousled strands, this only added to its authenticity and charm, as if perfection came effortlessly. Luke refused to use clips, tie his hair, or style it differently. He also wouldn't wear makeup or anything of the sort. It was already bad enough being a damned woman. He wasn't about to adopt her habits as well. However, this attempt at maintaining a disheveled style only amplified his allure, giving him an even more genuine and captivating presence. His eyes were equally striking, a vibrant blue that seemed to replicate the sky. Luke's eye color in his masculine form was a darker shade of blue. "Hurry up, Mother. I'm starving," Luke complained, pounding his small, delicate fist on the breakfast table. Wednesday raised an eyebrow at him. "Are you already getting into character?" she asked. "Yes, I need to get used to being a spoiled and beautiful little girl," Luke replied with a slight smile. He had spent time crafting the personality of Tuesday Foster. Tuesday would be a spoiled, rebellious, and shamelessly arrogant child. She would revel in breaking rules and have no qualms about speaking rudely or treating others with disdain. With such a flawless appearance, it seemed only natural for her to act as though the world revolved around her, convinced her beauty entitled her to reign like a queen. She would enjoy having followers at her beck and call, using them to gather information as needed. For Luke, playing this role wouldn't be an impossible challenge, though it did require a shift in his usual behavior. Luke, who genuinely despised attention-seeking efforts and preferred to be left alone, now had to channel his natural impatience and innate rudeness into a more exaggerated performance, projecting arrogant confidence and an air of superiority. "There's no need to act here," Wednesday muttered with a slight grimace. The personalities she found most annoying were queen bees like Bianca. Now Luke was about to adopt that kind of attitude, only 1,000 times more arrogant and spoiled, and the very thought gave her a slight headache. "Here you go, sweetheart," Natasha said sweetly, turning around and placing plates brimming with food on the breakfast bar. Wednesday frowned as she observed Natasha. "You too," she thought incredulously. Natasha was already fully immersed in her role as a loving and accommodating mother, as if she were also part of Luke's show. "It's part of the act, Wednesday," Natasha said, noticing her look and shrugging. "If we're going to do this, we might as well do it right. Besides, it helps me get into character for when I go to work." "Exactly, Jenna. I expect you to adapt to the role I assigned you," Luke said with a slight smile as he took a bite of his toast. "I know, the smart and shy girl, right? That shouldn't be too hard. I just need to show a slightly more effusive expression," Wednesday replied. "Exactly. The only thing you need to stick to is the concept of shyness. You can't let that sharp attitude of yours take over. No glaring at people with disdain or making sarcastic, cutting remarks. None of that," Luke said, emphasizing the key points. "And what if someone bothers me?" Wednesday asked, raising an eyebrow. It would be hard for her not to insult the person and make them cry with just her words, or give them a beating if things escalated physically. "Nothing, just endure it. Don't react. If someone provokes you, take a deep breath and move on," Luke replied. He was the center of attention, not her. A shy personality couldn't confront bullies with biting comments, or, in a more extreme case, beat them up. Luke, noticing Wednesday's clearly displeased expression, spoke again. "All you have to do is wait for your sister," he said with a smile. "The spoiled girl will take care of it," Wednesday asked. "Yes, even though Tuesday doesn't show affection, she's very protective of her sister. Considering her violent personality, it's natural she wouldn't hesitate to start a fight to defend her," Luke replied. Wednesday nodded. Either way, it wouldn't be hard for her to ignore the normies like annoying flies until Tuesday got involved. That way, you can investigate in the library or other places. It won't be unusual for you to do that," Luke added, giving him a thumbs up. Why do you enjoy this whole acting thing with different personalities so much? Natasha asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Although she knew the mission was crucial, and all, she couldn't help but feel Luke was taking things to an unnecessary level. After all, creating personality sheets for every new identity seemed a bit excessive. As long as they weren't discovered by the Spellmans, she thought, that should be enough. For her, it was different. Being an adult, she couldn't show a cold attitude at work while gathering information or whatever. As for Luke and Wednesday, they could maintain their original personalities at school. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't get what attracts you to this. You with your, well, egocentric, cold, arrogant personality. And suddenly you're diving into all this role-playing. It's a little odd, isn't it? She added. It's fun to see how people react, Luke replied. You see them as puppets, don't you? Moving among them and manipulating them like pieces in a game without them realizing it, Wednesday commented with a smile, clearly enjoying the idea. Both she and Luke shared a twisted sense of amusement when it came to manipulation. Yeah, something like that, but hey, I don't harm them, right? Sometimes I even help them. Remember that woman? Luke asked, his tone casual. The fentanyl addict? Yes, I remember. You erased her memories of the drugs and her dependency on them. It was weird watching you play the hero for a few days, Wednesday replied, amused but with a faint hint of mockery in her voice. It didn't last as long as I thought. In movies and comics, it seemed more fun, Luke said with a slight sigh. You played hero only to get bored afterward. What a twisted concept of entertainment, Natasha remarked with a dry laugh. I wasn't the only one, by the way. Wednesday was with me. At first, she was reluctant to act that way, saving lives and all that tedious morality. But little by little, she became more cooperative, Luke said, turning his head toward Natasha. Wednesday let out a snort, but didn't deny it. Cooperative is one way to put it. I wasn't interested in saving anyone, but I'll admit that watching the reactions of terrified criminals or grateful civilians had its charm. Manipulating their emotions in real time was interesting, she said in her characteristic cold tone, though there was a spark of amusement in her eyes. You acted like vigilantes because you enjoyed manipulating everyone's reactions, Natasha asked, raising an eyebrow. Partly, yes. It made the process less boring while we gathered the mutilated parts we needed for the ritual, Luke replied, and Wednesday nodded. Natasha observed them in silence for a few seconds, as if trying to decide whether they were joking or genuinely as unhinged as they sounded. If that's what entertains you, go ahead, she finally said, shrugging. You act too. You're the loving, widowed mother working hard to care for her 2 kids, all sweetness and sacrifice, all while you're actually cold and calculating. And you have the nerve to call me weird for enjoying this, Luke said reproachfully. My act is necessary. Yours is just a pastime, Natasha replied, unfazed. She had to be sociable at work if she wanted to gather information. Sure, necessary, but don't kid yourself. We know you enjoy being the adorable widowed mom in this little town. It must be fascinating to see everyone buy into your performance, Luke said with a slight smile. Maybe you don't want to admit it, but you're not that different from us. Manipulating perceptions is part of the game, whether for fun or necessity, Wednesday added, tilting her head slightly toward Natasha. It's not the same. Now go to school, you're already running late, Natasha said curtly, clearly not in the mood to continue the discussion. I'll be late. I have to stick to my script, Luke said with a carefree smile. Fine, see you, Wednesday said as she calmly got up. She had no time to waste. With her brainiac persona, being late was out of the question. Oh, wait, don't forget this, Luke said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a pair of black glasses. He handed them to Wednesday, who looked at them for a few seconds before taking them. She put them on and began walking toward the exit. The glasses were fake, just an accessory, but essential for completing the image she projected. The intelligent, shy, and mysteriously cute girl who fit perfectly into the narrative they were constructing. My name is Violet Johnson. I was born in Shadyside, a small and forgotten town, with two ordinary parents and a brother 1 year younger than me. Last summer, I started my own project. It wasn't for school or because someone else asked me to. It was my decision. Maybe it was the excess of free time, or perhaps the accumulation of doubts I had been ignoring for years. I've lived here for 16 years and always thought Shadyside was just a boring place. After all, it's a town with fewer than 4,000 inhabitants, quiet streets, normal businesses, and an almost desolate atmosphere. It's normal, I used to tell myself. What can you expect from such a small place? But something seemed strange, which led me to begin this peculiar investigation. Every now and then, someone would leave Shadyside, a family, a single person, or an elderly couple. No goodbyes, no explanations. One day they were here, and the next, their houses were empty, their cars gone. It seemed as though they decided to leave town overnight. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave to find something better, I thought. But the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Why weren't there any rumors or even farewells in the neighborhood? The only thing left after their departure was empty houses. Although not for long. Someone was always taking care of those properties. A local real estate company, Shadyside Realty, which would remodel the houses and quickly put them up for sale or rent. Last summer, just a few months ago, a family living about 2 blocks from my house abandoned the town. It was one of those sudden disappearances. One morning, their car was no longer in the driveway. This event, combined with the thoughts piling up in my head day after day, pushed me to take action. I decided to go out and investigate on my own, even though deep down, part of me didn't take what I was doing very seriously. I felt like one of those characters in movies who uncover a big conspiracy, but how likely was it that something like that was happening here? After all, no one else seemed alarmed. If there was truly a crime behind all this, how could it go unnoticed? How was it possible that everyone accepted these disappearances without questioning them? Because of this, I went looking for answers at Shadyside Realty, the real estate company handling the empty houses. There, I was greeted by Mrs. Whitmore, a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled hair and a measured smile. I decided to write down the conversation exactly as it happened, so I wouldn't miss any detail. Date, July 15th, 4:00 p.m. Location, Shadyside Realty office. Violet, hi, I wanted to ask about the Miller's house. I saw they moved out recently, and, well, it caught my attention how quickly it all happened. Mrs. Whitmore, oh, of course. The Millers sold the house a few weeks ago. They decided to move to a bigger city. Why do you ask? Violet, because it was very sudden. I never saw a for sale sign on their house. Who bought it? Mrs. Whitmore, the real estate agency acquired it as an investment. That's something we do with promising properties. We've already remodeled it, and a family will be moving in soon to rent it. Violet, I see. But what intrigues me the most is that I don't recall them saying goodbye to anyone. I thought they would have at least said goodbye to my family or something, considering they lived just 2 blocks away. Mrs. Whitmore, well, the Millers were closer to certain neighbors in particular. From what I know, they hosted a farewell dinner with their closest friends before leaving. Violet, do you know exactly where they went? Mrs. Whitmore, I can't answer that. Client confidentiality, you know. Violet, thanks for your time. The conversation ended there, but something about Mrs. Whitmore's response left me with more questions than answers. The farewell dinner story sounded convincing, but at the same time, why hadn't anyone on my street mentioned it? I decided to talk to some neighbors to confirm that part of the story. The Millers' closest neighbors were the Carpentiers, an elderly couple who don't seem very friendly. Still, I gathered my courage and went to their house to talk to one of them. It was Mr. Carpentier, who answered the door. Date, July 16th, 10:30 a.m. Location, Mr. Carpentier's house, neighbor of the Millers. Violet, hi, Mr. Carpentier. Sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask you something. Mr. Carpentier, with a huff, what? Violet, Trying to ignore his tone, I wanted to know if you know anything about the Millers. I noticed they moved out recently, and, well, I was struck by how sudden it was. Mr. Carpentier, crossing his arms and leaning against the doorframe, and what's the surprise? People move all the time. It's normal, especially for a young couple like them. This town is a boring hole. If I were their age, I would have run off too. Violet, forcing a smile, sure, I get it. It's just that I don't remember them saying goodbye to anyone. I thought they would have at least mentioned it to you, their next-door neighbors. Mr. Carpentier, yeah, they did. They invited my wife to a farewell dinner. I didn't go, I had to watch the game. Violet, I see. Can I speak with your wife? I had a conversation with Mrs. Carpentier, but it didn't add much. She only confirmed the farewell dinner and that the Millers did say goodbye to their close neighbors. There were no relevant details. Maybe I was seeing ghosts where there were none. Maybe this was just what it seemed, a family deciding to leave this gray town behind to look for something better. Even so, I kept investigating. Maybe I had too much time to think. My girlfriend, well, my ex-girlfriend now, broke up with me just before summer break started. She's from Sunnyvale, and her mom was never okay with her dating someone from Shadowside. On top of that, she was opposed to a same-sex relationship. With a broken heart and lots of free time, I poured myself into this investigation, which yielded no success all summer. I looked into the people who had left Shadowside recently, walked through every street in town over the summer, but it all seemed pretty straightforward. The empty houses either had for sale signs or were rented out to new families, though very few, only because of the low rent prices. The houses that were left empty always met the same fate. Some were rented out to new families, albeit rarely, due to the affordable rent. Others were for sale, with faded signs that seemed eternal in their windows. The only unusual thing, if it could even be called unusual, was that every family that left did so in the same way, a farewell dinner with just their next-door neighbors and nothing more. Then their house was sold or rented out by Shadowside Realty. No drama, nothing strange. What else would you expect when a family moves away? By mid-August, one of the houses was occupied by a newlywed couple with 2 kids, around 10 years old. I saw them during one of my walks around town. I spoke with them to welcome them, and the only information I got was that the rent was very cheap, and the place didn't seem so bad. A quiet town where, according to them, their kids could grow up safely without the dangers of the big city. Summer ended, and I started my school year at Shadowside's only high school. My investigation led nowhere. All I had gathered were coincidences that might not mean anything. I felt exhausted, frustrated, and a little foolish for spending my entire summer on something so unproductive. As for the Miller's house, it remained unoccupied all summer. The realtor had said it was rented out, but the new tenants only arrived a few days ago, as far as I've heard. I don't know who they are, nor have I seen them since I gave up my habit of wandering around town. They're probably just another normal family. Violet, breakfast's ready. Violet, breakfast is ready. Violet quickly packed her books and supplies into her backpack, put on a plaid shirt, turned off her computer with its unproductive research, and left her room. She glanced at the time and hurried down the stairs. If she didn't eat quickly, she'd be late again to Mr. Memphis's class, the oldest and strictest teacher of them all. Being late to his class was never a good idea. "Where's Josh?" Violet asked, sitting in one of the kitchen chairs and dropping her backpack carelessly on the floor. She wasn't the most meticulous girl with her belongings or appearance. Some even considered her a tomboy. "I already called him. He should be coming down soon," replied Janice, Violet's mother. Josh was her younger brother, only a year apart from her. "Josh, get down here. I'm not waiting for you to finish your breakfast today," Violet shouted impatiently. The other day, she had been late to class because of her brother. A few minutes later, Josh, a chubby boy with dark skin and a sleepy expression, came downstairs grumbling. "What?" Violet asked with a mouthful of food, frowning at her brother. "Nothing." Josh muttered under his breath, plopping into the chair lazily. Tomboy, Josh murmured when Violet stopped paying attention to him and began scrolling through her phone while eating breakfast. 5 minutes later, a horn sounded. Violet finished her breakfast just in time, got up quickly, grabbed her backpack, and said goodbye to her mom. That's Simon. If you want to walk, keep eating, Josh, said Violet as she walked toward the door. You know I need to finish my breakfast, Josh complained, standing up and following his sister. He decided to take the toast in his hand. He wasn't about to sit through 2 hours of class waiting for lunch. You should have woken up earlier, Violet said, opening the door and heading toward a black truck that wasn't even remotely clean. Hurry up, you two. I don't want to be late for the grumpy old man's class, shouted a lanky guy with brown hair sitting in the driver's seat. Violet and Josh climbed into the back seats. The girl in the front passenger seat turned to look back with a smile. Hey, Violet, ready for another week of thrilling events at the best school in the county, the girl said with clear sarcasm since nothing out of the ordinary ever happened at Shadyside High School. In fact, it was much more boring and less exciting than a normal school, or so all the town's teenagers thought. Thrilling, my ass, Violet said with a grimace as she brushed aside some fast food wrappers from the seat. The girl who spoke was Kate, and the boy was Simon. Both were Violet's best friends. Kate had long hair tied back in a ponytail, brown eyes, and dressed fashionably, unlike Violet. Oh, still sulking over Sam? Get over it, tough girl. You're more sensitive than you let on, Simon teased, slamming his foot on the gas pedal. Josh quickly buckled his seatbelt. He couldn't trust his safety to this stoner friend of his sister. Why does it always smell like weed? Josh thought, rolling down the window. Hi, Kate, Josh said once he felt safe and could breathe fresh air. Hey, Kate replied, not noticing the interest Violet's younger brother showed in her. Shut up, Simon, Violet snapped in response to his earlier comment. I'm over Sam. I'm just in a bad mood because of my research, she added, clicking her tongue. We told you all that stuff was useless, Kate said as she fixed her makeup using the sun visor mirror. Everyone wants to get out of here. You know the two of us are saving up to leave this boring town, she added, glancing at Simon, who let out a cheer of approval. Saving up with a very noble job, Violet said sarcastically. Hey, dealers contribute to society. How else would guys our age have fun without drugs? Simon joked. Violet shook her head, but said nothing. Her two friends had a buddy who worked at the town pharmacy and got them pills and other stuff to sell. That was their savings method to escape the town. Speaking of exciting events, I know you said it sarcastically, but something out of the ordinary should actually happen today, Josh said, trying to catch Kate's attention, and it worked, as the group fell silent. Oh, what do you have for us, hacker boy? Simon asked, curious. From what I've found out, there are 2 new girls joining the high school. Remember the Miller's house? A widow rented it with 2 daughters our age, Josh said, hoping his news would spark some excitement among his friends. Oh, right. I forgot about that, Kate commented. She knew about a new family moving into the Miller's house thanks to Violet's fruitless investigation. How do you know they're our age? Violet asked, showing genuine interest. The idea of someone new arriving in the small and boring Shadyside was intriguing, especially for her. She already knew all the girls at her school, and as a lesbian, her options had never been abundant. Kate always insisted she meet someone new to get over Sam, but how could she in a town where everyone had known each other since elementary school? Mom talked to Mrs. Foster and found out her daughters are 16, Josh replied. So your source is your mom? Simon asked. Raising an eyebrow before bursting into laughter, Kate quickly joined in. Yeah, so what? What source could be better than Shadyside's gossiping residents? Josh replied in a slightly defensive tone, though he knew they were teasing him. Point for Josh, Kate said, still smiling. I'll tell Mom you called her a gossip, Violet said, then drifted back into her thoughts while the other 3 debated whether they'd see the new students today, what they'd be like, and so on. Could this be what she needed to distract herself from Sam? Though part of her tried to keep her expectations low, another part couldn't help but feel curious. While Violet was lost in thought and the other three chatted, mostly Kate and Simon, Violet's eyes caught something unusual through the window. A few meters ahead of the car, a solitary figure walked casually along the sidewalk. At first, it was the hair that caught Violet's attention. A golden tone, shining as if reflecting the faint morning light, cascaded perfectly down the figure's back. Something about the way it moved, almost ethereal, made Violet frown and snap out of her thoughts. "Who is that?" she murmured to herself, leaning toward the window. The car kept moving, and the closer they got, the more details she could make out. The figure was feminine, with a slender, delicate silhouette, but there was something about her relaxed stride that felt defiant and arrogant. "Hey, look at that," Violet suddenly exclaimed, interrupting the conversation. "Look at what?" Simon asked, glancing lazily into the rearview mirror. "There on the sidewalk. That girl," Violet replied, nodding toward her. "Who is she?" Josh asked, pressing his face against the glass to get a better look, accidentally nudging Violet in the process. She didn't mind. She was also focused on getting a clear view of the girl's face. As the car passed the girl, they all got a good look at her, and the inside of the car fell into abrupt silence. Her face was almost unreal, with perfectly symmetrical features that seemed sculpted. Her skin was smooth, flawless, but it was her eyes that truly took their breath away, an icy blue that, far from being warm, seemed to pierce anyone who dared to look at them. The girl, who was none other than Tuesday, noticed their stares. She turned her head slightly and met their gaze. Simon, without realizing it, began steering the car toward the sidewalk, still mesmerized by her presence. "Simon!" Kate shouted, smacking his arm. The car jolted as Simon swerved back onto the road, his eyes still fixed on the rearview mirror. "You almost killed us, you idiot," Kate exclaimed. "What did you expect? It's not my fault that girl looks like she walked out of a magazine," Simon shot back, his heart still racing. "Who the hell is she?" Violet muttered, not caring about the near accident as she turned to look at the figure through the rearview mirror. Josh let out a nervous laugh, still looking back. "She's probably one of the new girls. She's walking to school, but at that pace, she'll be at least 10 minutes late." Simon let out an exaggerated laugh. "Take that, Sunnyvale bastards. We'll finally beat them at something. Our school has a supermodel and theirs doesn't." Violet rolled her eyes at Simon's comment, but an idea started to form in her head. Without thinking too much, she leaned forward. "Simon, stop the car." "What?" Simon looked at her confused, while Josh and Kate exchanged curious glances. "Stop the car and reverse," Violet insisted, pointing her thumb behind them. "We'll offer to give her a ride. That way she won't be late." Simon grimaced, clearly unsure. "Are you crazy? What if she thinks we're stalkers?" "Or weirdos. I don't want her first impression of us to be that bad," Josh added, adjusting his hair just in case. "It won't look weird if we do it casually. Besides, it's polite," Violet replied with an authoritative tone that left no room for argument. "I don't know. Maybe she doesn't want to get into a car with strangers," Kate commented more cautiously. "It wouldn't be good for a girl like her to see them as weirdos or perverts." "Stop the car and reverse," Violet repeated, and no one wanted to argue further. The car slowly reversed until it was even with Tuesday's figure. "I should have cleaned the car today," Simon thought nervously. Hey," Violet greeted, rolling down the window and sticking her head out slightly to get her attention. Luke, or Tuesday, stopped and looked towards the normies who had stopped. "We're heading to school. If you want, we can give you a ride so you won't be late," Violet added, trying to sound casual, though the slight tension in her voice betrayed her nerves. "You idiot, you shouldn't assume she's going to school," Josh thought. Although everything indicated that if she was one of the new students, maybe she wasn't, and they'd just end up in an awkward situation. "I was supposed to be late," Luke thought, suppressing an exasperated sigh. He was supposed to be late and make a big impression on everyone. But as he caught a faint scent of grass coming from the backseat and noticed the unsure gestures of these kids, He smiled inwardly. Maybe these normies could be my first minions, he thought. I guess that's fine, Luke replied in a neutral, almost bored tone. Violet opened the door and pushed Josh to the other side so Luke could get in. My name's Violet. What's yours? She asked as Luke got in and closed the door. Tuesday Foster. After Luke introduced himself, the ride in the van passed in uncomfortable silence, at least for Simon, Kate, Josh, and Violet, who kept turning her head to glance at Tuesday before quickly looking forward again. Luke stared out the window silently, his left leg lightly tapping the car floor. The four normies thought he was impatient to reach the school, which somehow made them even more nervous for reasons they couldn't quite understand. Actually, Luke wasn't acting or trying to amuse himself with the normies' reactions as if it were a theatrical performance. He was seriously thinking about where on earth the evidence his parents had hidden could be. There were 3 search zones he, Wednesday, and Natasha had identified: Shadyside, Sunnyvale, and the forest between the 2 towns. Ideally, the evidence would be hidden in one of the 2 towns, as searching there would be much easier compared to combing through a vast forest. Natasha chose Shadyside as the first search location because of the town's strange atmosphere, though this might not have anything to do with his parents and could simply be a sad, boring town with fewer than 4,000 residents. Where do I even start looking? Luke thought, frowning slightly. He wasn't some kind of Sherlock Holmes. He didn't even like mysteries or puzzles. Wednesday was far better than him in this regard. Although she believed he was also good at solving mysteries, since he'd uncovered the truth about Crackstone before she did, that had only happened because he already knew the plot from watching the Netflix series in his past life. If the Spellmans hadn't found the evidence, how would he? It was likely that the Spellmans had been careless and, after killing Sophie and John, didn't continue looking for more evidence. They were satisfied with killing them and eliminating the evidence they had on hand without ensuring it was 100% of the total. Even so, this was possible because his parents had been meticulous in hiding the rest of the most important evidence, so it had to be extremely well concealed. I can't be pessimistic when I'm just starting. I have my methods, Luke thought, shaking his head. His methods were his blue aura and his white aura. With his blue aura, he can navigate people's minds, searching through memories or reading their current thoughts. With his white aura, he can extend his domain to cover an area of 20 kilometers, allowing him to encompass a vast search zone. However, it's important to note that the effective radius, the distance from the center, his current position, to the edge of the covered area, is 10 kilometers in every direction. This is still a large area, but there is too much information to process. Thousands of people, houses, objects, constant movements, animals, etc. It is mentally exhausting for Luke. For this reason, Luke rarely expands his domain to its full range and usually uses it at much shorter distances, focusing on combat, anticipating surprise attacks, using shambles, or quickly and efficiently identifying nearby threats. Expanding his domain entirely would be useless since there are maps of Shadyside for that. As for his blue aura, he needs someone whose memories he can read to obtain relevant information. Someone with relevant information, and Luke doubted these normie teenagers would have anything useful. He and Wednesday had already investigated the town's histories. At least the publicly available information online, and they probably knew more than the locals themselves. Tuesday, we're here, Violet said. Luke snapped back to reality, noticing the van was already parked, the engine off. The 4 normies were staring at him. Why are they waiting for me? Get out, for crying out loud, Luke thought, starting to get irritated. Oh, yeah, Luke said, opening the door and stepping out. At that moment, the others followed, as if they had been waiting for him to get out first. Damn it, we're already late, Simon muttered. Because of you, idiot. You drove so slowly my grandma could have done better, Kate snapped irritably. Shut up, Simon replied quickly, giving her a warning look. He didn't want Tuesday to hear their conversation, though she clearly seemed lost in her own world, uninterested in whatever the normies were discussing. Simon had slowed the van since they picked up Tuesday. Watching the new girl, who looked like a supermodel, through the rearview mirror had been distracting, and he couldn't help it. He had to slow down, or they'd have crashed and killed everyone. The group of 5 entered the building through a side entrance, taking a shortcut from the parking lot. Since they were late, they barely encountered any students on their way in. However, the few who did see Tuesday couldn't help but turn their heads, some even stopping in their tracks with their mouths agape. "Who's that? New girl?" murmurs were heard behind the group. It was obvious she was a new student. Someone with her appearance couldn't have gone unnoticed after a week of classes. Tuesday showed no reaction, maintaining an expression that radiated arrogance. "Do you know which class you're supposed to go to? I can show you the way if you want," Violet said, stepping beside Tuesday. So far, she was the only one brave enough to speak to the new girl. "I think my sister mentioned something. Yeah, social studies. That's probably it," Tuesday replied after a brief pause. "Oh, old Memphis class. I mean, Mr. Memphis, we're in the same class," Violet said, smiling at the response. "So are we," Kate added, with Simon nodding in agreement. Neither wanted to be left out. Josh, however, felt out of place, being a year younger than the other 4. "Fine, but first, tell me where the restroom is," Luke said casually, but with an underlying tone of authority. He said it so naturally and confidently that no one in the group took it as rude. "Oh, sure, it's nearby. I'll take you there," Violet replied quickly. Then she turned to the others. "You guys go ahead to class. We don't want Mr. Memphis giving us a collective tardy." Kate, who was about to protest, remembered she wasn't into girls, but her best friend was, and wanted to get over a breakup. With that in mind, she dragged Simon off to class. As for Josh, he had no choice but to head to his own class without daring to say goodbye to Tuesday. Not a word. If she looks like that, how must her sister look?" Josh muttered as he walked to class, curious if both sisters shared the same striking beauty. Luke and Violet entered the girls' restroom. The girls' restroom, a realm I never thought I'd visit, Luke thought as he stepped into one of the stalls, closing the door with a soft click. Meanwhile, Violet quickly washed her hands and glanced at her watch. Minutes passed, and for some reason, Tuesday hadn't come out. "Is she doing number 2? Violet wondered, but shook her head. On one hand, she refused to believe someone with a face like that could be doing number 2, and besides, she hadn't heard any sounds that would give her away. Violet glanced toward the stall and noticed grayish smoke rising into the air. "What the hell?" she thought, frowning. "Hey, what are you doing? We need to get to class. Mr. Memphis won't like it if we're late," Violet said. Luke opened the door and stepped out, holding a lit cigarette in his right hand. Before Luke could say anything, Violet spoke up. "Are you smoking?" she asked, surprised, with a hint of fascination in her voice. "Why does that surprise you? That van reeked of weed," Luke said with a faint smile. Fortunately, he had learned to smoke cigars before, so smoking cigarettes was easy, and he wouldn't cough like a novice. "You're right. Simon always smokes in the car, and the smell lingers for days," Violet said with a nervous laugh. Luke looked at her, still maintaining his nonchalant demeanor. "What about you? You talk about your friend like you're not a smoker, too." Violet stared at her, surprised and momentarily at a loss for words. After a long second, she finally responded, "Okay, fine, yeah, I smoke too, but not as much as Simon and Kate. They're the real pros at it." "This is just a regular cigarette," Luke said, handing her the one he was smoking. Violet looked at the cigarette that had just touched Tuesday's lips. Without hesitation, she took it and took a drag. Sam didn't like me smoking, Violet thought, but quickly pushed away memories of her ex-girlfriend. Now wasn't the time. "Shouldn't we get to class? We're already really late, and I'm telling you, old Memphis doesn't tolerate tardiness. He's a grumpy old man with zero patience," Violet said as she smoked, watching Luke pull another cigarette from the pack and light it. "It's fine. What's he going to do, yell at us for being a few minutes late?" Luke replied dismissively, waving a hand. "I don't know, the guy's a grouch. He might punish us even if you're new, Violet said, sounding unsure. Relax, we won't get punished, Luke said casually as if it were nothing. Violet dropped the subject and stayed in the girls' restroom, smoking with Tuesday. She never imagined the day would unfold like this. The new girl, easily the most beautiful person she had ever seen, turning out to be a rebellious smoker who couldn't care less about school class. Why are you more than 20 minutes late? Professor Memphis exclaimed furiously as the classroom door burst open and 2 students walked in. His voice resonated with authority, silencing any murmurs in the room. Professor Memphis, an elderly man with gray hair and a slight hunch, wore an outdated and dusty suit, as if he had pulled it out of a forgotten trunk. His small, sunken eyes flashed with impatience as he turned his stern gaze to Violet. You again, Violet. He started but stopped abruptly when he noticed the second student walking in behind Violet, a blonde girl with facial features that could only be described as perfect. She was none other than Tuesday, or rather Luke. Everyone in the class immediately noticed the new student, falling into an abrupt silence at the sight of Tuesday's striking features. Why you are the new student? The professor stammered, trying to regain his composure as he swallowed hard. Yes, Professor, Tuesday Foster. It's a pleasure to meet you, Luke replied, offering the elderly professor a dazzling smile. His tone was warm, soft, almost musical, and he inclined his head slightly in a polite gesture. Violet blinked in surprise. Just a few minutes ago in the restroom, Tuesday had been arrogant, uninterested, and utterly unconcerned about being late. Now she seemed like a completely different person, polite, smiling, and charming, so convincing that even Violet almost believed it. Wednesday, seated at one of the middle desks, couldn't help but roll her eyes. She knew this was one of the traits Luke had given his character, Tuesday, using her appearance to manipulate adults while showing arrogance and rebellion among her peers. Well, Miss Foster, I understand you're new, but that doesn't excuse being more than 20 minutes late to my class. Explain yourself, the professor said, coughing to regain his composure. I'm sorry, Professor. I got lost trying to find my way around the school. Since I'm new, I'm not familiar with the hallways yet, Luke responded, lowering his head slightly, as if embarrassed. The students in the classroom watched Tuesday's every word and movement, completely captivated, even the women. Fortunately, he continued, flashing Violet a grateful smile, I ran into Violet. I asked her to help me and give me a little tour to get my bearings. But it was my fault we were so delayed. She was only trying to help me. Oh, that's understandable since you're new, said Professor Memphis, his expression softening. None of his students could believe that Professor Memphis could make such an expression. But don't let it happen again, Miss Foster. You should learn from your sister's example, the professor added. Tuesday's head turned, and her blue eyes locked onto Wednesday, or rather, Jenna. Violet noticed the cold glint in her eyes, then followed her gaze to a black-haired girl with glasses, pretty, with an intellectual air. Is she her sister? They don't look alike at all, Violet thought. Maybe they were stepsisters, sharing the same mother but different fathers, or twins who didn't share the same appearance. Oh yes, I'll definitely learn from my sister, Luke said, breaking his gaze from Wednesday and returning to his polite facade. Good, take your seats, said the professor, and Tuesday walked toward one of the desks in the back, followed by Violet. All eyes were on her, or him, whichever it was. Violet sat next to Tuesday. Fortunately, the desk was free. She glanced at her from the corner of her eye. What an actress, she thought. She knew that sweetness was entirely fake, a facade to avoid punishment. She wasn't the only popular girl to use such a tactic, though she was the only one who managed to avoid punishment from the grumpy Professor Memphis. The bell rang, and class ended. Within seconds, many students began rising and heading toward the new student's desk to talk to her. The good personality she had shown Professor Memphis made them believe she would be easy to get along with. Luke kept a slightly interested expression, not overly enthusiastic, just enough to appear approachable. They asked her many things: where she was from, what school she had attended, why she had moved here, and so on. Luke knew that if he displayed an openly unfriendly or impatient attitude, he would scare everyone off and isolate himself. That was basically his true personality, and exactly what he had done during his first year at Nevermore. But he couldn't use that personality with Tuesday. He needed to become the queen bee, balancing rebellion with just enough charisma to make others follow him while ensuring they understood the hierarchy. Violet, still seated next to her, observed as others approached, introducing themselves or trying to start conversations. Tuesday responded to each one with a mix of superficial courtesy and subtle arrogance that, far from driving them away, seemed to attract them even more. As for Jenna, she was completely overshadowed by her sister, thanks to Wednesday's brilliant portrayal of her character. To everyone else, although Jenna was pretty, her slouched posture and the way she avoided eye contact made her seem insignificant, like a shadow in the background of the scene. When it was her turn to introduce herself to the class, she adopted a soft, timid voice. Her introduction was brief and dull, filled with pauses that almost seemed forced. The contrast between the two sisters was so stark it was almost comedic. Luke was astonished by Wednesday's masterful performance of becoming invisible. He knew that Wednesday's true personality naturally drew all eyes to her, rivaling or even surpassing Tuesday's magnetism, which was largely due to her striking appearance. Wednesday had such an intense presence that many felt uncomfortable around her. But here, playing Jenna, she had transformed that intensity into invisibility. Thus, a week passed since classes started at Shadowside for Luke and Wednesday. In just 7 days, Luke, under his false identity as Tuesday Foster, had achieved something that would take others months, if not years. His presence was magnetic, not just because of his looks, which seemed to belong on the cover of a fashion magazine, but also due to the personality he had meticulously crafted. He wasn't good, nor was he bad. He was haughty, yes, but not to the point of being off-putting. He exuded a confidence that bordered on arrogance, but it was so natural that no one minded. Many were surprised to see that one of his groups of friends consisted of Violet, Simon, and Kate, a group that wasn't popular, but also wasn't entirely outcast. They had a reputation for being rebellious and a little troublesome. In just 1 week, his fame had spread throughout the school. Even students from Shadowside Middle School wanted to catch a glimpse of the supposed supermodel who had joined the high school. Meanwhile, Wednesday took a diametrically opposite path. She chose to keep a low profile, and while her impeccable grades made her a favorite among the teachers, her introverted demeanor kept her from standing out among the students. Despite her striking beauty, which could have easily secured her a more prominent place in the social radar, Wednesday went almost unnoticed. Her reserved attitude, brief answers, and constant downward gaze ensured that most people didn't pay much attention to her. In Shadowside, a small town where new students were inevitably a topic of conversation, even someone like Jenna would have drawn attention simply for being new. But she remained overlooked, partly thanks to her acting and partly due to her sister's overshadowing influence. Tuesday's strong presence, with her charisma and dominant personality, played a crucial role. No one dared to intimidate or mock Jenna for fear of what her sister might do. Although there was no direct evidence that Tuesday would react aggressively, no one wanted to take the risk of messing with her sister. So far, no one had even seen them talking to each other. They barely. Monday, September 15, 7:00 a.m. Dong, dong, dong. The eerie sound of a funeral bell echoed through the room, filling the air with its ominous resonance. It was the alarm Wednesday had chosen for her phone, as dramatic and gloomy as she was. The sound pierced Luke's ears, causing him to frown and bury his head in the pillow with a muffled groan. It was the daily reminder that he had to get up, get dressed, and face the dreaded school day with an identity that wasn't truly his. The idea of deceiving others, making them believe he was someone entirely different, held a certain allure. But that didn't make waking up any easier. And worse yet, having to act like he belonged to the opposite gender all day long. It was Monday morning, and Luke cursed the very existence of school weeks under his breath. The alarm kept ringing, each chime reverberating in his head. Burying his face in the pillow did nothing to drown it out, so Luke sought refuge in the one thing that always managed to soothe his irritation. He turned toward the delicate body lying beside him, half wrapped in the blankets. Wednesday, still asleep, breathed calmly, her face serene and perfect, like someone deep in peaceful slumber. Luke slipped under the blankets, wrapping his arms around her and settling in next to her. His head rested close to hers, close enough to catch the faint scent of her hair. He buried his face in her hair, closing his eyes and holding her tighter. Wednesday's eyes slowly fluttered open. Finding Luke embracing her, she didn't appear the least bit annoyed and made no attempt to pull away. Not wanting to get up again? Stop trying to run from reality and embrace the early mornings, Wednesday murmured, her eyes half closed as she adjusted herself in Luke's embrace. The funeral bell continued to toll, and the room remained shrouded in darkness. She also preferred nighttime, but during the school year, she adjusted her sleep cycle. "Nothing will happen if we skip one day," Luke remarked in a hoarse voice, not opening his eyes. Wednesday let out a mocking huff. "You know Jenna can't miss a day. Her brainiac personality wouldn't allow it," she said in a soft yet cutting tone. "And as for you, if you skip, the whole school will know you're not there. The school will call home, and our delightful mother will either have to lie or expose you." "Don't mess with me," Luke muttered, knowing he had no way out. His fake identity as Tuesday had gained so much popularity in such a short time that his absence would cause a scandal. Wednesday turned toward him, giving him a small tap on the forehead with her finger, enjoying the slight annoyance it caused. "Happy with your popularity, Queen Bee?" she asked mockingly. At the tap, Luke opened his eyes and looked at Wednesday. Their faces were very close, and though it was dark with his clairvoyant eyes and their proximity, he could see her features perfectly. Luke loved Wednesday's face in the early morning, a face no one else got to see, only him. "I don't know if I'm happy, but it's funny how everyone acts around me. Kind of entertaining, though I'm not sure how much longer I can stand it," Luke replied, with a hint of bitterness and a faint smile. His popularity, while morbidly amusing to him, also weighed heavily. He hated being the center of attention and had an antisocial personality. After replying, Luke couldn't help but kiss Wednesday. Wednesday accepted the kiss. "I guess this makes mornings more bearable," Luke commented when they finally pulled apart. "Of course," Wednesday said, getting out of bed and turning off the alarm. She turned on the light and began changing. The windows had to stay closed. No one could see Luke in his original form. In a small town and a new house, there were always nosy neighbors. "Speaking of your popularity, stop trying to conquer the school and focus on finding information," Wednesday said, her tone returning to its usual serious monotony. Wednesday had read through a large number of books in the school library. Her goal was to find historical texts about Shadowside's founding and significant events in its past, important local families, town legends, and seemingly irrelevant facts that could become key if analyzed correctly. There were books with information that couldn't be found online. What made this research approach useful? Natasha had a job related to local administration, which gave her access to historical archives and official town records. Though she'd been busy this week managing her false identity and handling routine tasks, she hadn't wasted any time. She knew she needed to act discreetly, as some of the files she could use wouldn't be easily accessible. The only one who seemed to have done little was Luke. Unlike Natasha and Wednesday, who shared their findings, he hadn't looked for information or contributed to the investigation. The day before, they'd held a routine meeting to discuss their progress so far. Although they hadn't discovered anything significant during this first week, they were a step ahead compared to when they arrived. "I know I didn't contribute anything to yesterday's meeting, but don't worry, I've got a lead in something that might be important," Luke said with a faint, confident smile as he got out of bed. "What is it?" Wednesday asked in her monotone voice, though with a hint of curiosity. Confidential, Luke replied, trying to act mysterious. It was a small lead, and he needed to ensure it was worthwhile before sharing it. Wednesday rolled her eyes and dropped the subject. They got dressed, Luke took the potion, and they headed downstairs to have breakfast before going to school. So, when are you going to contribute something to the investigation? Natasha asked, placing a plate full of food in front of Luke. Wednesday, sitting beside him in her Jenna disguise, read a small book while sipping her morning coffee. You're complaining about me not contributing, too. It's only been a week, Luke replied with a grimace. A week and you've done nothing. Do you think we're here on vacation? Time is gold. I thought you were supposed to be a great detective, Natasha said, recalling how Luke had solved the Crackstone mystery, capturing Marilyn and the hooded Spellmans. That was luck. With my clairvoyance, I noticed someone watching me when I left Nevermore. After that, it was as simple as catching the stupid faceless one and reading their memories, Luke replied irritably. What he had done well, and he wouldn't downplay it, was gathering evidence to present to the outcast police, ensuring the Spellmans and others faced justice. However, the situation in Shadowside was entirely different. No one was watching him, and he didn't have anyone whose memories he could read to uncover something. Here, he had to find evidence buried for over a decade. Oh, and I thought we had the next Sherlock Holmes, Natasha said with a faintly mocking smile. I may not be the next Sherlock Holmes, but I've found something much better than books or documents with irrelevant information, Luke replied with a disdainful grin. During yesterday's meeting, the only thing Natasha and Wednesday had found were Shadowside's important historical events and notable incidents, barely anything worth mentioning. None of the events tied into what they were looking for, a major event over a decade ago, around the time their parents should have arrived in Shadowside or Sunnyvale. You seem confident. What is it? Natasha asked curiously, looking at Luke. They weren't competing to see who could bring the best information or find evidence the fastest. The sooner someone found a lead, the better for everyone. He won't tell you. It's confidential. He probably doesn't have much confidence that it'll be useful, Wednesday commented without lifting her eyes from her book. She had completely read Luke's behavior from earlier when he tried to act mysterious about the lead he'd found. She read me like a book, Luke thought, shooting Wednesday a glance. She knew him far too well. Well, that's disappointing, Natasha said, turning her attention back to what she was doing. It's not that it's useless. I got a lead through someone from Shadowside, Luke said in a more serious tone. That caught both of their attention. Natasha looked at him again, and even Wednesday briefly shifted her focus from the book. What is it? Natasha asked. I talked to a guy, Simon, on the phone. One of my contacts, Luke began with a smug smile. His new phone book was filled with new contacts. I asked him if Shadowside is as boring as it seems, and the guy wouldn't stop talking to me. He sounded like a parrot. I guess he felt accomplished having my attention, Luke added, speaking slowly. And, Wednesday asked, turning toward him with a slight raise of her brow. She remembered Simon. The lanky guy who reeked of marijuana, one of the new friends from Tuesday's rebel group. And at some point, he mentioned something interesting. He said that last summer, his friend Violet was investigating some kind of conspiracy, Luke responded. What kind of conspiracy? Natasha asked skeptically. She didn't have much faith in a normie teenager's investigation. From the little he told me, it had to do with why so many people leave Shadowside and why no one seems to talk about it. According to Simon, Violet found it strange that every year several families leave town, and no one treats it as something significant, Luke replied. Wednesday put her book down on the table and looked at him more attentively. And what else did he say? Did she find anything shady? No, Simon didn't seem to believe in the idea of a conspiracy and barely paid attention to Violet's investigation. From what he said, they visited some abandoned houses, but in the end, he said Violet gave up, thinking it all pointed to families simply leaving for somewhere more interesting. Luke answered with a slightly irritated tone. Stupid Simon, Luke thought. If he had paid more attention to his friend's investigation, Luke would have more information by now. With his identity as Tuesday, Luke had gotten close to Violet. She was one of the people he interacted with the most, along with her group of stoner friends. However, Violet never mentioned her investigation, even though Luke had asked her the same questions he later asked Simon. He had asked her first, so he really thought the normie had nothing relevant to tell about Shadowside. It wasn't until Simon brought up the investigation that Luke realized Violet might have been hiding something. Next time he saw her, he planned to talk about it, or simply read her memories if she refused to share. It was likely Violet hadn't mentioned the investigation because she didn't want to come off as a weirdo in front of Tuesday. If her close friends didn't take her seriously, someone like Tuesday, who had a rebellious and uninterested image, was even less likely to. So, are you going to talk to this Violet, or read her memories if she refuses? Wednesday asked. Luke nodded. There's a slight chance she found something, but I don't think it's connected to the evidence or your parents. They were only in Shadowside or Sunnyvale for a short time. If someone's making people disappear from town for some unknown reason, it won't have anything to do with them, Natasha commented. That's true, but if there really is something shady going on here, whoever's behind it might have information about my parents or their arrival, something, Luke said with a shrug. He wasn't very hopeful about this. The chances of a conspiracy existing were slim, and even if there was one, it was unlikely to have anything to do with his parents. But if there are criminals who have been making people disappear from Shadowside for years, and no one says anything, it means these criminals are highly capable. There's also a small chance they might be outcasts. And if they are outcasts who have been around for a long time, they could know something about his parents' arrival more than 10 years ago. So, there's no harm in investigating. It's a thin thread, but it's worth following, Wednesday commented. Just then, a car horn sounded. Luke stood up and looked at Wednesday. Come on, my loyal subjects will take you to school. You don't have to walk, he said. Even though it was only a 15-minute walk, Luke didn't want Wednesday walking alone while he rode to school in a car. Fine, Wednesday nodded, getting to her feet. These are not my main minions, thought Luke, eyeing a new and very well-maintained car. It wasn't the dirty truck with a marijuana smell that belonged to Simon. The ones tasked with picking him up so he wouldn't have to walk to school were Simon, Violet, and the other two. We were passing by and thought we could give you a ride Tuesday, said a boy, stepping out of the driver's seat with a sycophantic smile as he looked at Tuesday. Wednesday, who was behind Luke, wanted to roll her eyes and make a cutting remark but held back. She enjoyed the manipulation they were working on Luke, but Tuesday's personality, a textbook queen bee, did not sit well with her. That kind of personality had been her nemesis during her time in normie schools and even at Nevermore, where she faced off against Bianca. The normies in front of him were the stereotypical popular kids. The boy was the quarterback of the football team, Connor. Riding shotgun was the head cheerleader, Madison, and thus, one of the most popular girls in Tuesday's grade. In the backseat were other boy, Kyle. Oh, how do you know where I live? Luke asked, raising an eyebrow. He had made many fake friends this week thanks to his great reputation as Tuesday, but the main group he spent time with were the rebels, Violet, Simon, and Kate. I asked Simon, "Are you coming?" Connor asked, opening the back door for Tuesday to climb in. What are you, his butler? Thought Wednesday, a slight twitch forming in her eyebrow. I guess so. It wouldn't be good for me to keep being late. My sister is coming too, Luke replied with an air of smugness as he got into the car. Connor shot a quick glance at Wednesday, and when she got in, he closed the door. Luke had already used the excuse of not knowing the school and his charming, innocent personality with several teachers. If he kept it up, he wouldn't be able to escape punishments no matter how perfect his appearance seemed. The other boy, Kyle, made some room and nervously greeted Tuesday, who lazily nodded in response. Hi, Princess, Madison greeted enthusiastically, smiling at Tuesday. "Hi, Maddie. You look great today. New hairstyle." Luke replied in a much friendlier tone, though it remained calm and carried a hint of loftiness. Wednesday, who had climbed in behind Luke without saying a word, discreetly jabbed him in the side. Nobody noticed except Luke, who felt a faint pain in his lower back. "Hey, you know how relationships between typical popular girls work. They complement each other but secretly hate each other," Luke said to Wednesday through their telepathic link. Madison brought a hand to her hair, nervously twirling a strand of her blonde locks. "Do you really think so?" "Yeah, it's new. I thought I'd try something different but wasn't sure how it would look," she said, trying to sound casual, though a hint of excitement slipped into her tone. "It suits you well," Tuesday said, leaning back nonchalantly in the rear seat. "Thanks, Tuesday," Madison replied, a faint blush appearing on her cheeks, a rare sight for someone known as the typical arrogant queen bee. "Oh, I see how she's totally hatting you on the inside," Wednesday remarked sarcastically, observing Madison's expression. She noticed Madison had no ill intentions toward Tuesday. In fact, she seemed more like a harmless admirer. This was mostly due to Tuesday's otherworldly appearance and their choice of loose, unisex clothing, which even made popular girls like Madison fall for them, despite not being lesbian. "Fine, I admit it. She's not secretly hatting me," Luke said, also picking up on Madison's infatuated expression. The fun part about using this fake identity was seeing reactions like these. "Just remember, technically, you're mine, so don't go overboard with the smiles and compliments toward other women. If you want to flatter the guys like that, I don't mind," Wednesday said, her tone mixing jealousy and teasing, cutting off the conversation. Luke made a slight grimace. He'd never compliment a man. The ride went smoothly, with the three popular teenagers vying for Tuesday's attention. Meanwhile, Wednesday stayed silent, wearing a timid expression since she couldn't put on her usual emotionless, intimidating face. They arrived at the school, and the class started as usual. Violet, Simon, and Kate arrived 5 minutes late and earned a scolding from the professor. Fortunately, it was one of the nicer professor, so they avoided punishment, though not the public reprimand. As Violet walked to her desk, she shot an angry look at Tuesday. "Oh, that's a new kind of look," Luke thought, intrigued. It was the first time someone had looked at Tuesday with hostility, and it wasn't just anyone but Violet, the rebellious lesbian girl. It wasn't hard for Luke to figure out Violet's orientation. First, it was obvious from her clothing and mannerisms. Second, she didn't hide it, and Simon had mentioned Sam, Violet's ex-girlfriend, who, to Luke's mild surprise, was from Sunnyvale. Throughout the class, Violet kept throwing frowning glances at Tuesday, who was sitting with Madison, Connor, and the others, far from her and her group. The bell rang, and Luke headed to the cafeteria with the popular crowd, at the center of the group, with everyone vying for his attention. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Luke thought. For a week, it had been amusing to see people's reactions and how they responded to his fake identity, but continuing to play the queen bee role was exhausting for someone as antisocial as him. Wednesday's role, as a shy nerd, seemed much more manageable over time. As he ate at one of the central tables in the cafeteria, Luke noticed Violet approaching with a frown. "Hey, Tuesday," Violet said in a challenging tone, interrupting the lively chatter of the group. Everyone at the table looked at Violet with surprise and disapproval. It wasn't common for someone to dare to break into the popular crowd's circle, much less with that attitude. "What do you want, Violet? Sam's not here," Connor said with a mocking smile. Everyone at the table laughed except Luke, who maintained an expressionless face. "Go back to your table with your stoner friends," Madison said, crossing her arms, her tone a mix of superiority and disdain. Saved from these useless conversations, Luke thought as he calmly stood up from the table. He much preferred being with Violet, even if the situation turned awkward, over continuing to pretend to be a queen bee. He was already bored with the reactions and the manipulation. Violet had been shown a rebellious and haughty personality, more in line with Luke's true self. "Hey, Tuesday, you don't have to go with her if you don't want to," Madison said, surprised that Tuesday stood up. "Yeah, there's no need to be afraid of her. She's just a little rebellious," Connor added, trying to play the macho protector. Luke looked at them from where he stood, irritation flashing in his cold, icy eyes. The silence that followed his gaze was almost tangible. It felt as if the atmosphere at the table had shifted suddenly, like an invisible, dangerous aura had descended. Wednesday, observing from a corner, shook her head. He lasted a bit longer than when he played the vigilante, she thought, slightly surprised, having expected Luke to drop this persona even sooner. The popular group sat in awkward silence. There was something about the way Tuesday's blue eyes stared at them that made their stomachs tighten uncomfortably. "This doesn't concern you," Luke finally said, grabbing Violet's wrist. "Come," he added, and before anyone could interfere, Luke dragged Violet out of the cafeteria and into an empty hallway. Violet, who had been angry at Tuesday, was startled by the strength of the grip from the girl, with a delicate frame and shorter stature. "What do you want?" Luke asked, releasing Violet and leaning his back against the wall, arms crossed. "What the hell was that?" Violet muttered, still in disbelief, staring at Tuesday with restrained fury but also a hint of amazement. "Talk," Luke said impatiently, though he already knew the source of Violet's anger. "You should have told us you were going to school with someone else," Violet exclaimed, remembering her frustration. "Because of you, we got scolded in front of everyone. A message would have been enough. Your mother took almost 5 minutes to come out and tell us you weren't there," she added, frowning even more. "Oh, I'm so sorry, really," Tuesday said, feigning an apologetic expression that still carried a hint of insincerity. That disguise again, Violet thought. She had seen this act Tuesday used to escape punishments or reprimands. It worked thanks to her appearance, though her performance was good, not flawless. "Really, I feel awful. I didn't mean to be late again, and I forgot to let you guys know. Simon and Kate must understand. They didn't seem upset," Luke continued, his tone carrying a touch of feigned naivety, paired with a slight smile that was subtly mocking. "Stop acting. I know it's all fake. I've already seen your true personality," Violet said, refusing to be fooled. She only had one lingering question about Tuesday's personality. Was she more like the haughty queen bee who managed to keep everyone under her control, or the rebellious girl who smoked on the first day and clearly lacked patience? "Tish, you should have arrived before that idiot Connor. As compensation, I'll do more than 50% of the work that old Memphis gave us. What do you say?" Luke said, flashing a smile at Violet, who began to hesitate. "Really? That's a lot of work," Violet said, narrowing her eyes and looking at Tuesday with suspicion. On the first day of school, when Tuesday arrived late, Professor Memphis had assigned a 2-week group project, and Violet had suggested they be partners. "I'll do it. To make sure you trust me, we can work on it at your house so you can see me actually doing it. What do you say?" Luke asked. At my house," Violet thought, suddenly growing nervous and forgetting her earlier anger. Just the thought of having Tuesday at her house made her uneasy. "You don't want to? Well, I can't think of anything else if you don't believe my apologies," Luke said, shrugging and starting to turn back toward the cafeteria. "Wait, fine, I accept. We'll go to my house. I'll make sure you work," Violet said, grabbing Tuesday's wrist. "Today after class?" Luke asked. "Yes, Simon will drive us. This time don't get into Connor's car," Violet replied. "Fine," Luke said, slipping out of Violet's grip and heading toward the cafeteria. Although he didn't want to deal with those annoying normie teenagers, he hadn't finished his lunch and was still hungry. Easy, now stealing her research will be a piece of cake, Luke thought. This way, he wouldn't have to sneak into Violet's house at night. Getting the file Violet had written on her research was far easier than reading memories and piecing them all together. "What's your true personality, Tuesday?" Violet wondered, watching Tuesday's back as she walked away. Luke was traveling in Simon's dirty truck to Violet's house. After finishing the school day, Simon drove them there. Both he and Kate were surprised that Violet had managed to convince Tuesday to go to her house. On top of that, her parents were at work, and Josh, her brother, was at the school club, so they were alone. Incredible. If Sam finds out that a girl like that is at Violet's house, he's going to regret letting her go, Simon said enviously as he watched Tuesday walk into the house. Yeah, do you think Tuesday is a lesbian? Kate asked, equally surprised and envious since she also wanted to go inside, but Violet had told them they needed to study. My heart says no because, come on, look at her. It's like someone sculpted perfection into a person. It's hard to believe that a girl like her wouldn't be interested in us men. But, Simon replied, pausing dramatically as he glanced sideways at Kate, who was waiting with evident curiosity. My brain says yes. Kate raised an eyebrow. And why's that? Simon scratched his head as if searching for the right words to explain his reasoning. Look, it's not just that she's gorgeous, it's the way she acts. Didn't you notice? She looks at guys like they're a nuisance. When someone tries to compliment her or get close, she gets distant, cold, almost like compliments make her cringe. Simon had noticed this over the days. He was very observant, especially when it came to Tuesday, a goddess who had descended to Earth and arrived in their boring town. Now that you mention it, Kate murmured, recalling Tuesday's gestures at school. And besides, she dresses, I don't know, unisex, right? Neither fully feminine nor masculine. It's like she doesn't care at all about attracting guys. And not just that, there's this aloof attitude like she's above all of us, especially men. It's like she looks down on us. Simon sighed again, leaning his head against the seat back. If that doesn't scream lesbian, I don't know what does. Is your heart still clinging to hope? Kate asked, looking at him with amusement. Yeah, it's a shame, but at least if she's a lesbian, I've got no chance. So, well, it hurts less, I guess, Simon replied, throwing his hands up in resignation. Kate raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a mix of disbelief and amusement. Wait, did you really think you'd have a chance with her, even if she weren't a lesbian? Simon opened his mouth to answer, but immediately closed it. And what about you? Are you happy she's a lesbian? Simon asked, deflecting the question. What? No, of course not. Why do you ask? Kate replied, caught off guard. I don't know, it's just that your reactions have seemed strange to me lately. You get a little nervous when she's around. And if she's a lesbian and you suddenly start acting weird too, well, I don't know, it makes me think things, Simon said, smiling mischievously. Kate huffed and turned her gaze toward the window, clearly uncomfortable. It's not that, idiot, it's just, I don't know how to explain it. There's something about the way she carries herself. Something about her presence, her confidence, plus the clothes she wears. It gives me very masculine vibes, she said. Masculine vibes, Simon repeated, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, that's why it's weird, Kate said, trying to find the right words while frowning. Look, her appearance is like, I don't know, like a princess or a benevolent goddess. You know, the kind of beauty that's supposed to feel warm and kind. Go on, Simon said, nodding slowly, recalling the time Tuesday apologized to Professor Memphis on the first day. That warm and kind personality seemed perfect for her appearance, but it was just a facade. But then there's her personality. She has this aura that intimidates you, but not because she's rude or aggressive. It's because she always seems one step ahead of everyone. That's why all the popular girls didn't even try anything against her, Kate continued. Like a tough guy, but with the face of an angel, Simon asked, trying to summarize. If you want to put it that way, then yes, Simon, Kate said. So, Tuesday is like one of those gorgeous female bosses in video games, intimidating and seems to know all your moves before you make them, Simon said, smiling slightly. Yeah, something like that. It's hard to explain, okay? You don't get it because you're just thinking about how pretty she is, like all the other guys who only think with their dicks, Kate said. Laughing, Simon started the truck and pressed the gas pedal, leaving Violet's house behind in seconds. Sorry about the mess. I didn't clean this week, Violet said, as she picked up a pile of dirty clothes from the floor and hastily stuffed them into the closet before quickly shutting the doors. Luke, unfazed, sat calmly on the unmade bed. "It's no big deal," he said with a shrug. "I'm the same way, unlike my perfectionist sister," he added with a slight grimace, recalling Wednesday and her obsession with order. If he wanted to sleep in the same room as Wednesday, he had to be tidy, unlike when he shared a room with Xavier. Wednesday didn't tolerate even a single wrinkled piece of clothing on the floor or a book out of place. Even the slightest hint of disorder was enough to earn a cold stare from her that made Luke reconsider his life choices. But Luke had decided to adapt. Sharing a room and sleeping next to his attractive Gothic girlfriend was infinitely more valuable than the freedom to be messy. Now he was tidy, thanks to Wednesday. "Your sister, you don't talk much about her or to her," Violet commented casually as she threw some papers into an overflowing trash can. "Not really. We have our differences," Luke replied lazily, staring at his hands. He still wasn't entirely used to his delicate and beautiful feminine hands. Violet fell silent for a moment as she watched Tuesday. There was something almost hypnotic about the way she stared absent-mindedly at her hands. It was like she had stepped out of a classical painting. "You know, sometimes you look like you came straight out of a painting," Violet murmured, her voice barely audible as her gaze seemed to lose itself in Tuesday without her realizing. What is she saying all of a sudden? Luke wondered, raising an eyebrow as he looked at Violet. "A painting. I've heard that before," Luke said dryly, recalling Natasha's comment. It was incredibly annoying to have this appearance. At first, it had been amusing for his ego and for manipulating people, but now it had become an irritating burden. A burden because everyone seemed to be spellbound, looking at him with a mix of fascination and confusion, throwing comments about his perfection as if he were some kind of living work of art. At first, seeing those reactions had been entertaining and ego-boosting, but for someone like Luke, the amusement wore off quickly. Violet quickly changed the subject when she noticed Tuesday didn't seem thrilled to discuss how perfect she was. She quickly opened her laptop, typed in the password, and looked at Tuesday. "You can work here. It'll be easier to type, and then we can print the sheets and hand them to old Memphis," Violet said. "The research must be in there, if she hasn't deleted it," Luke thought as he stood and approached the laptop. Violet, who was about to get up to give her seat to Tuesday, froze when she saw Tuesday's delicate fingers pointing at her head. Before she could say anything, she felt an overwhelming drowsiness wash over her. Her eyes closed, and she fell asleep. "Sleep," Luke thought, as Violet fell forward asleep. He caught her and easily placed her on the bed. Without wasting any time, he began searching for the file with the research Violet had done over the summer. Just like the room, Violet's desk on her laptop was a mess, with many programs, files, and folders scattered all over the screen. It took him about 10 minutes until he finally found a file named Investigations Summer 2022. Yes, she didn't delete it, Luke thought happily. If Violet had deleted it, he would have had to read her memories and organize all the facts. Instead, reading the file and recalling it with his eidetic memory was much easier. It made sense she hadn't deleted what she wrote over the summer, no matter how much it had been a failure in the end. Everyone would be reluctant to erase a project they dedicated so much time to. Luke spent 20 minutes reading the research completely. "It's actually strange," Luke murmured, resting a hand on his chin. It was odd that every year, people leave Shadowside and abandon the town with barely a goodbye to the neighbors. Why would they do that? A boring town. If the reason was as simple as that, the thousands of towns similar to Shadowside would do the same, and soon they'd be deserted with everyone living in the big cities. Why didn't this happen in Jericho? It was a town similar to Shadowside, with a little over 10,000 inhabitants, double that of Shadowside. Why didn't this happen in the neighboring town of Sunnyvale? They were neighboring towns, and Sunnyvale had a size similar to Jericho. Unlike Shadowside, these two towns were growing in population, rather than decreasing and having an exodus larger than the number of people staying. Violet came to these conclusions, but since there didn't seem to be any conspiracy or crime, and everyone seemed to accept the idea that people left Shadowside because it was a boring little town. She ended up accepting that idea. But Luke knew that there were people with powers in this world, like him, which made a conspiracy much more likely. Shadowside Realty, Luke thought, his next destination in mind. This was the real estate company that handles the houses left behind by the people of Shadowside who abandon the town. They acquire the houses as investments or to rent them out. They must know something or be involved in some shady business. Luke closed the research file, and before waking Violet up, he modified her memories so that she would forget that Tuesday pointed at her strangely with her fingers and made her lose consciousness. When Violet woke up, she did so naturally, making her think that she had never actually lost consciousness or fallen asleep. Luke had spent an hour working, completing more than 60% of the homework. Seeing the time, he still had time to visit the real estate office. He quickly said goodbye to Violet, who wanted to accompany him to his house, but Luke refused. She really wanted to make amends for her mistake, Violet thought, watching Tuesday's back as she walked away. She worked diligently, and a large part of the work was completed. Luke arrived at Shadowside Realty at 5:34 p.m. It was a 2-story building with a normal, well-maintained appearance. The entrance was a set of double glass doors, and as he pushed them open, the faint sound of a bell could be heard. There's air conditioning, Luke thought, noticing the change in temperature. The atmosphere inside was cool and comfortable. He walked up to a counter where a man was staring at his computer, watching a video from a viral YouTuber. His job wasn't particularly demanding, attending to potential clients who wanted to rent or buy a property and directing them to the real estate agents. The rest was administrative work, making his job quite monotonous. Luke stood there, observing the man, who was wearing headphones and giving 100% of his attention to his monitor. When the man noticed a shadow looming over him, he turned his head, and what he saw made his mouth form a small O. Here we go again, Luke thought, starting to feel annoyed. The employee flinched slightly, yanking off his headphones and nearly spilling his coffee on the keyboard. Hi, what do you need? The guy asked, unable to take his eyes off the blonde girl standing in front of him. I'm looking for Mrs. Whitmore, Luke replied. He was about to offer an excuse. It would seem odd for a teenager to want to speak to a real estate agent, but the employee clumsily got up from his chair and said, Follow me, I'll take you to her. That was easy, Luke thought. At least his appearance was useful for making others act servilely without him having to talk much or resort to using his mental powers. They walked until they stopped in front of a sleek black door with a spotless silver nameplate that read Elizabeth Whitmore. The employee knocked softly twice, and after a few seconds, a voice from the other side said, Come in. Mrs. Elizabeth, this girl is here to see you, the employee said. The middle-aged woman, who exuded a professional air, looked up from the papers she was reviewing and locked eyes with Luke. Her eyebrows rose slightly, a subtle expression of surprise at the flawless features of the young girl who had entered her office. Luke was surprised by Elizabeth's composure and professionalism. Most people were left gaping the first time they saw him. Oh, you must be one of Lucy's daughters, Tuesday, right? Elizabeth asked in a calm tone. Yes, how did you know? Tuesday asked, stepping into the office with a raised eyebrow. On their first day in Shadowside, Natasha had stopped the car in front of the real estate office to meet Elizabeth and pick up the keys to the house they had rented. However, Luke and Wednesday had stayed in the car, so they had never met Elizabeth. Elizabeth offered a small smile and said, My son, Elias, is in the same grade as you and became friends with your sister. Elias? Luke repeated, trying to recall if Wednesday had ever mentioned a boy by that name. As he thought, he sat down in the chair across from Elizabeth without asking or waiting to be invited. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, though her expression remained friendly. Yes, Elias. I doubt he caught much of your attention. He's pretty reserved, always buried in his books or working on some project. A brainy one, she said with a touch of maternal pride. I see, Luke replied in a neutral tone. "So, what brings you here? Is it about the house? Is there something wrong?" Elizabeth asked. Luke glanced toward the employee, who was still standing by the door, staring at him. "Stuart, you can go now," Elizabeth said, following Luke's gaze. Stuart flinched slightly, snapping back to reality. "Oh, why yes, sorry," he stammered before quickly leaving and closing the door behind him. "Well," Elizabeth asked, turning her attention back to Tuesday. But this time, she noticed a different look in the girl's eyes, a cold, icy gaze. Before she could fully process it, her vision blurred and she lost consciousness. Luke used his telekinesis to gently lower Elizabeth's head onto the desk, ensuring there was no commotion. "Time to work," thought Luke as he prepared to navigate through memories. He estimated he had about 10 to 15 minutes, any longer, and it would seem suspicious for him to stay so long in a real estate agent's office. 10 minutes later. Nothing. What a waste of time, thought Luke, crossing his arms. All he found were trivial memories. Elizabeth talking to clients, showing houses, signing contracts, cooking for her son, Elias. The ordinary life of a typical normie. There was nothing shady about the acquisition or rental of properties by the real estate agency, at least not when it came to Elizabeth. She wasn't an outcast either. To be sure, Luke decided to use an ability he hadn't tapped into in a while, his eye of truth. In seconds, a third eye naturally appeared on his forehead, a gray eye. "A normie," Luke murmured, shaking his head in disappointment. Quickly, Luke modified a few of Elizabeth's memories so that when she woke up, she wouldn't suspect anything and would believe she'd been conscious the entire time. The last conscious memory she would have was of Luke's calm gaze, as though nothing unusual had occurred. From there, he reconstructed the conversation as if it had continued uninterrupted. He implanted a memory of Tuesday acting like the spoiled, arrogant girl she was, disdainfully complaining about the house her mother had rented, calling it too plain and beneath her standards. That should do it. Now wake up, thought Luke. Elizabeth began blinking slowly, feeling a slight dizziness as if she'd been lost in thought for too long. Lifting her head, she found Tuesday wearing an impatient expression. "Well, I think that'll be all," said Luke in a curt tone, looking at Elizabeth with a mix of disdain and boredom. Elizabeth straightened in her seat, shaking off the lingering strange feeling in her mind. Her face resumed its professional, though slightly tense, expression. "Yes, if we find a house that meets your needs, I'll call your mother. If she agrees," she said, her tone somewhat awkward. "Perfect," Luke replied, heading for the door. He opened it and exited the office. As he walked through the building toward the exit, Luke came across a boy he recognized instantly. "Elias," he thought, identifying the boy who had appeared in so many of Elizabeth's memories. He gave Elias a 1-second glance and lost interest. Just another normie, and a shy bookworm at that. Elias watched Tuesday as she left the office, his eyes fixed on her figure until she disappeared entirely from view. He didn't like Tuesday, even though he'd never spoken to her directly. According to Jenna, a recent friend, or so Elias liked to think, the stories she told about Tuesday weren't exactly flattering. According to Jenna, Tuesday was the worst of the sisters, arrogant, haughty, and always manipulating everyone around her. She used her popularity at school to get out of any trouble, relying entirely on her charm and unstoppable attitude. Elias wasn't sure if he believed everything Jenna said, but seeing Tuesday in person only made those stories seem more believable. He frowned, annoyed by the girl's presence. He couldn't understand how someone could be so brazen and still get away with it. "Oh, right, because of her looks, Tish," he thought, stepping into his mother's office. He also couldn't understand how Jenna could be related to someone like Tuesday. Jenna was the complete opposite if you got to know her. Intelligent, kind, and hardworking. How could two sisters be so vastly different in personality? "What was Tuesday doing here?" Elias asked, his irritation evident. "Not even a hello for your mother," Elizabeth murmured, glancing at her son. "Hi, Mom, so what was that girl doing here?" he repeated. She just came to complain that the house her mother rented is a dump compared to their previous home in Los Angeles, Elizabeth replied, shaking her head. I had to endure her complaints and condescending looks for 10 minutes. She barely let me get a word in. A spoiled and haughty girl, it seems, she added. Yeah, I know. I don't understand how Jenna can be her sister, Elias scoffed with disdain. I don't like her. She's not a good influence on Jenna, he added. That's family business, and it's none of our concern, Elizabeth said as she picked up some papers she had been working on earlier. Still, her mind briefly drifted back to a moment. A single look from Tuesday before the spoiled complaints about the house began. A cold, piercing look, entirely different from the arrogant and bratty attitude she displayed during their conversation. 1. That serene and icy gaze reminded her vaguely of someone else, someone with the eyes of a person who had stained their hands with blood, someone dangerous. A chill ran down Elizabeth's spine, but she quickly dismissed it and shook her head slightly. Impossible, she's just a spoiled brat, she thought, discarding the absurd idea. That's it, all my effort for nothing, Luke said, as he finished recounting everything he had discovered about Violet's investigation and the memories he had read from Elizabeth, the real estate agent from Shadowside Realty. Luke had returned home a few minutes ago after visiting the real estate agency. Natasha was at work, so he and Wednesday were in the living room, surrounded by papers, maps, and a couple of coffee cups. Wednesday, sitting upright, flipped through a few documents with her usual blank expression. So, your mental powers are useless, and you're already throwing in the towel, she asked in a tone that was half reproach, half mockery. Luke, who had returned to his male form, was lounging lazily on the couch. Yeah, so what? Have you found anything? He replied with a lack of enthusiasm. Finding hidden evidence sucked. Even if you didn't find what you were looking for, I admit Violet's investigation was, in fact, interesting. Something's off, Wednesday said, looking at Luke. I thought the same, but I don't have any more leads to follow. The real estate agency seems clean. The people who work there aren't strange at all. And Elizabeth is just a normie with a monotonous life, Luke said. We just need to find another lead to follow. Look at this, Wednesday said, standing up elegantly and handing a piece of paper to Luke. Luke sat up, albeit without much enthusiasm, and took the paper. It was demographic statistics for Shadowside. Wednesday pointed to a particular line with a slender finger. The population of Shadowside has been declining for decades, she explained. And it's not something happening in other towns in the region. Look at Sunnyvale, for example. She tapped another set of figures lightly. Steady growth, normal just as you'd expect. But Shadowside, it's as if people are constantly abandoning the town, she added. Are there any reports of deaths or anything weird? Luke asked as he examined the data. No, just abandonment. In all the newspapers and records I reviewed, there's no significant incident where people have died, either naturally or due to crime. Not even during the time when your parents supposedly came to Shadowside, Wednesday replied, shaking her head as she casually sat on Luke's lap. Although I found some cases of natural deaths, they were all of very elderly people, so it's not suspicious that they passed away, she added. Then it's very likely that someone is behind these disappearances, Luke commented. That's what I suspect, and I'm even more certain now that you've told me about Violet's investigation. Most of the people who leave the town do so in a completely normal way. They put their house up for sale with the real estate agency, organize a farewell dinner with their neighbors, and then move away. But there's a small percentage that doesn't fit, Wednesday said. Oh, that's true. There's a small percentage that doesn't follow that pattern, Luke nodded. Yes, in this small group, there are no farewell dinners. Just vague mentions that they left the town without a reasonable explanation. Violet noted those cases, but since they were a minority and no one in Shadowside seemed alarmed, she let it go, Wednesday said, as she rested her head on Luke's chest, her fingers idly tracing circles on the fabric of his shirt. Luke ran a hand down Wednesday's back, deep in thought. So, we need to find the whereabouts of these people, right? He asked. Yes, that's where we need to investigate. What happened to these people who left Shadowside suddenly without talking to anyone? Whether they really left the town or were murdered and someone covered up their deaths, Wednesday agreed, her voice calm but sharp. But if we find the ones responsible for these disappearances, what good will it do us? Making people disappear for so many years requires an organized group or someone extremely capable. And what we're looking for isn't directly connected to Shadowside, Luke said, recalling what Natasha had told him. It's true that there doesn't seem to be a direct link to your parents or the Spellmans, but this criminal or criminals don't just make people disappear. In Shadowside, there's no record of any significant incidents or news of disappearances. It seems like they want to maintain the illusion that this is a quiet town, Wednesday said. True. Then it's possible that my parents' brief arrival was hidden by them, Luke said, and Wednesday nodded. Exactly. Your parents were powerful psychics, and the Spellmans who were chasing them were just as strong. It's very likely that after hiding the evidence, they caused a scene at some point, a fight, a confrontation. Something that wouldn't go unnoticed. But if someone in Shadowside is interested in keeping the town under the radar, they would have done everything possible to cover it up, Wednesday explained. Then, if this theory is true, we need to solve the mystery of the constant disappearances in Shadowside. Everyone here just assumes it's people leaving the town, Luke said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Yes, someone is carefully covering up these disappearances to make them seem normal. And if they have the ability to erase all evidence of your parents and the Spellmans, then we're dealing with a very capable group. Or an extremely methodical and skilled individual, Wednesday said, nodding slightly. Luke looked at Wednesday, and when she noticed his gaze, she returned it. What? She asked. You've literally put in check someone, or an entire group, that has kept this hidden for years, Luke said with admiration. Well, it wasn't too difficult thanks to the information you uncovered about that girl named Violet's investigation. It only confirmed my suspicions that someone is making people disappear. That made my job easier, Wednesday said, letting out a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Something rare for her, but she couldn't help it when she felt Luke's admiration. There was something strangely satisfying about him recognizing her abilities. I'm surprised by your modesty, Luke joked. It's not modesty. I just don't take credit for things that aren't mine. Now, give me 10 names from the minority who disappeared without a farewell dinner, without selling their house, and without leaving any trace, Wednesday demanded. In Violet's investigation, she had written about this minority that disappeared without a trace. No dinners, no discussions with the Shadowside Real Estate Agency, nothing. They supposedly just left the town. Luke sighed. All right, here they are. Michael Harris disappeared 3 years ago. His house was left untouched, but no one heard from him again. Rachel Mayer, 5 years ago, same situation. Emily Carter, a teenager, vanished 2 years ago. Julia and Henry Reynolds, a middle-aged couple, 7 months ago. Wednesday listened intently, memorizing each name until Luke finished listing the 10 people. Good, I'll visit the Shadowside police station. If there are this many disappearances and the police aren't doing anything, they're probably involved. There might be some trace, even if it's minimal, Wednesday said. By visit, she meant breaking in. As for me, Luke said, a thoughtful look on his face, it would be pointless for both of them to go to the station. Wednesday was more than capable of handling it alone. An interesting and morally questionable idea occurred to Luke. You said you found some cases of natural deaths, right? But they were all elderly people, weren't they? He asked, looking at Wednesday. Yes, and they weren't suspicious. They were very old, which fit with natural causes of death. Why do you ask? Wednesday replied. What if those elderly people didn't die naturally? What if someone also abducted them? We don't know why people are being taken, and it doesn't seem to matter whether they're young, middle-aged, children, or elderly. With these older people, it would be easier to cover up their deaths, Luke suggested. That's not a bad theory, said Wednesday. If the deaths were public, there must have been funerals. I'll dig up the graves and confirm if there are bodies or if they're just filled with dirt. If it's the latter, we'll confirm that someone is abducting people and covering up the murders, said Luke with a slight smile. He had never dug up a grave before. It might be fun. It's a good idea, and we'd confirm 100% that something bad is happening. Here's the list I made of the elderly people who died of natural causes, Wednesday said, getting up from Luke's lap and heading to the table covered in papers. She searched for a few seconds before picking up a sheet and handing it to Luke. Well, it's too early to start missions like breaking and entering. Natasha will take another hour to return. So now what? Luke asked, looking at Wednesday. I don't know, Wednesday replied in a monotone, though her eyes had a different spark as they looked at Luke. We could, Luke began, leaving his intentions hanging in the air. He and Wednesday exchanged a look, and without saying another word, they both started walking toward their room. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.